Welcome back to the conversation. I'm David Schuster. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has some rather, shall we say, unusual alliances that helped him and propelled him to become US House Speaker. One of his closest allies now is Georgia Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene. She has fashioned herself as something of a serious politician these days and something of an establishment figure. Who would have imagined that establishment and Marjorie Taylor Greene would ever be said in the same sentence? Well, here to talk about this is Joan Greve. She's a senior US political reporter for The Guardian. Joan, this relationship between McCarthy and Marjorie Taylor Greene, what do you make of it?
Yeah, well, it's kind of in some ways been in the works for a while. Republicans expected to win back the House in the midterms. They did not expect to win it by such a narrow margin as they did. But with that in mind, McCarthy's kind of been laying the groundwork for his speakership bid for a while now. And that has really involved sort of trying to build bridges with some of the far right members of his caucus. Of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene was removed from her committee assignments by when House Democrats when Democrats controlled the House because of her very extreme views and comments in the past. And so I think that one of the things that helped build that relationship between McCarthy and Marjorie Taylor Greene was that he did promise her, it appears, some pretty plum positions on certain House committees. It seems pretty likely that she will serve on the House Oversight Committee, among other potential positions. So it seems like this has been in the works for a while, and in the end, it proved pretty crucial to McCarthy winning.
And it also seems like Marjorie Taylor Greene, at least for the last several weeks, if not months, has been trying to essentially, mute things a little bit, tamp things down, almost like there's been a sort of a normalization of Marjorie Taylor Greene. But it sort of raises the question: is it Marjorie Taylor Greene who's sort of becoming more normalized, or is it the Republican Party which is sort of moving towards her?
Yeah, well, it's a really good point because we did see that Marjorie Taylor Greene was in McCarthy's corner from the first vote for the speakership. But you still had 20 people who were voting against him for the first I think 13 ballots or so, and then he eventually got that number down to 6, and he was eventually able to win. But I think that speaks to the fact of that even if you have a figure like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is so known for her rather extreme views, even if you have someone like that who's kind of starting to maybe, as you said, kind of like start to quiet those views a little bit, it's not like it's not like it completely eliminates any sort of far right sentiment within the House Republican Conference, because you still have the Matt Gaetzes and the Lauren Boeberts and those kinds of figures who are willing to kind of who really are willing to go to battle with someone like McCarthy because they view him as being too quote unquote establishment, even though he has made all of these concessions to them.
What are some of the concessions that the Freedom Caucus got? And I know that Matt Gaetz never voted for McCarthy. I think at one point it was present, and Lauren Boebert may be the same. But clearly, other members of the Freedom Caucus as a whole, they got a lot from McCarthy. How does that benefit them?
Right, so they won a number of important concessions. One that has gotten a lot of attention is this idea or this policy that will allow essentially any member of the House to call for a vote to oust the sitting speaker, and it'll be really interesting to see how that kind of plays out as the House moves forward. Because if, let's say, McCarthy tries to cut a deal with Democrats, to raise the debt ceiling, I'm not necessarily predicting that will happen, but there is this sort of like trigger mechanism that they can use to try to then remove him from his position. So that policy will kind of hang over the head of any sitting speaker, including now McCarthy. And so that was a big concession, but it also seems like it seems like there were at least some kind of tacit promises that certain holdouts would kind of get maybe certain committee positions. Of course, McCarthy does not directly assign who serves on which committees, but he has a lot of say in the matter. And now we're kind of starting to see, as those decisions are being made, some of the holdouts are serving on some really influential committees. I think it came out today that at least 2 of the members who voted for McCarthy about a dozen times, 2 of them are serving, I believe, on the Appropriations Committee. Another 2 are serving on the House Financial Responsibility Committee. But so it seems like they will have a fair amount of influence in this session of Congress. And so in that sense, they did win a fair amount by refusing to support him across 14 ballots or so.
There has been this debate over the last couple of weeks as to whether Kevin McCarthy essentially enabled the Freedom Caucus by tolerating and accommodating them for the last 2 years and perhaps not being as strong as some people had liked, with the argument being that if he was much stronger, the Freedom Caucus might have respected or feared him more, and therefore McCarthy might have been able to whip them in line. Do you buy that?
Well, I think that McCarthy more so than anything, I feel like McCarthy sort of kind of reflects the direction of his party. Of course, maybe if he had taken, I think that if McCarthy had taken a different tactic with this group, with this set of his conference, more likely than not, he just would have probably backed out of the speakership race altogether and would not have even probably been in a position where he was at least within grasp of winning the speakership. Because really this in so many ways, these holdouts, they reflect a very real part of the Republican Party. A large section of the Republican base, they sort of want to see their members go to battle against the quote unquote DC establishment, and that includes often it does include fellow Republicans who they might view as not being not viewing far enough to the right. And so I guess if McCarthy had taken a stronger stance, would it have changed the behavior of those members? Probably not. No, it probably would have changed his political position within the conference. But I think that McCarthy he made his bed and had to lie in it, and his decision was that he was going to play ball basically with these far right members for the sake of being able to continue to serve as a leader of the House. And I think his legacy will reflect that. But I think that at the end of the day, these members were probably always going to behave in the manner that they have. It was just a matter of who was kind of trying to corral them, and he decided that he still wanted to take on that role.
That role, is it maybe, I don't know, in name only, given how thin the majority is and the vulnerabilities that Kevin McCarthy has? Because of that, it just takes one member, as you mentioned, to have a new vote. I mean, it seems like it's hard to imagine anybody who would really want this job, given the parameters that Kevin McCarthy has to deal with.
Yeah, it does really feel like he's kind of having to govern with one hand behind his back at this point. He really, especially with what that policy that we already talked about a little bit, the fact that any member can call for a vote to oust the sitting speaker, that's really going to that could allow a lot of his the far right members of his conference to really kind of strong arm him at various points. And also it's important to remember that Republicans do not control the Senate, they do not control the White House, so it's not like they'll be able to pass actually have substantive legislation enacted. We saw them pass some anti-abortion bills today, but those are just headed nowhere in the Senate, and they're really just messaging bills. And so really the job of the Republican speaker in this Congress is going to be to kind of launch quote unquote investigations of the Biden administration and likely Joe Biden's family as well. And also to try to pass must pass legislation like a debt ceiling hike or a government spending bill. And I think that's going to prove extremely difficult. And so it is, I think it's fair to say that it's a pretty unenviable task to be Speaker of the House right now.
So if that's all that Kevin McCarthy is left with, and that is, these sort of maybe cosmetic PR type of investigations into Joe Biden, or cosmetic things that don't have any bearing on what the US Senate does, and maybe McCarthy gets tripped up over a spending bill or a budget bill, it will certainly seem to the American people like this is total government dysfunction. But it also may seem like to the American people, well, it's just sort of the status quo. Nothing's getting passed, nothing's really changing. How does this cut politically?
I think it's a really good question. I think that the House Republicans so far have indicated that they do intend to very aggressively investigate the Biden administration, including potentially one House Republican has already filed articles of impeachment against the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas. And I think that those sort of decisions and those kind of political acts will play well with the Republican base. Certainly, might help. They might get some. If they bring Secretary Mayorkas in for questioning, which I'm sure they will do a number of times. They might get some viral clips that will show up on right-wing news sites, which will help their fundraising numbers. But it's probably not going to win them many friends with the people who they really need to convince to support them. Like the people who might have supported Trump in 2016 and then flipped to supporting Biden in 2020. And that was the difference between a win and a loss for them. And so, I think that it will help them win some brown, those kind of, those political investigations and, those messaging bills might help them win some brownie points with their base, but clearly the support of their base is not enough to get them. It's likely not enough to get them back to Senate or the White House.
You mentioned Donald Trump. What is his standing right now with the Republican Party? I mean, he gave sort of a lukewarm, tepid endorsement of Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy, the first thing he does after winning is thank Donald Trump on January 6th. Where does Donald Trump sort of come down in terms of his influence these days?
Yeah, as the speakership battle was unfolding, there was an interesting analysis I saw that said that something along the lines of Donald Trump has unleashed forces that he cannot control, and I think there's some truth to that. A lot of the holdout members who were preventing McCarthy from winning the speakership were, they were kind of rode into office by writing a very by embracing Trumpist policy, or I should say Trumpist form of politics. And now that they are in office and they have some power themselves, especially because of House Republicans' narrow majority, they have much more power. Of course, if Republicans had won the House by a wider margin, this wouldn't have mattered at all, right? But because it was so narrow, they do have some power here. And it's I think that this whole speakership battle kind of showed that Trump may not have as strong of a grip on these members as he thought he did. And, we'll see how that impacts, future House fights and, whether he can corral them if need be in the future when that comes up.
Joan Greve, senior US political reporter for The Guardian. Joan, thanks for doing this. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And that'll do it for this edition of The Conversation. On behalf of Asher Cofield, Gina Kim, Craig Lowry, Bart Kyle, and the entire team at the Young Turks, I'm David Schuster. Thanks for joining us.